It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Osasuyi Dirisu, who is Executive Director of Policy Innovation Center, PIC. She'll be moderating this plenary. Let's put our hands together for her. You're welcome, Dr. Dirisu. And the speakers on this panel. This is a very hot panel, so please brace up. First on the list is the National Consultant Private Sector Partnerships, UN Women, Nigeria Country Office. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Hansatu Adegbite with her iconic hairstyle. We also have the CEO, KiaKia Finance, Olajide Abiola. Next up is Gender Officer, Inclusive Friends Association, Sussan Ihuoma. Let's put our hands together for Sussan Ihuoma. And also on this plenary is the founder, the Skilled Women Initiative, Chisom Mwako. Let's put our hands together for Chisom Mwako as she comes to the stage. Oh yes, we might need to clear the space. Sorry, I need help here. Let's move the speaker so she can... Please let's put our hands together for her. She comes to the stage. Thank you so much. Yeah. So you can remove the chair and then she'll use the mic. All right, and last but not least on this plenary is the Executive Director, Gender Safety and Advancement International, Adora Onyechere Sydney Jack. Let's put our hands together for her as she comes on stage. So we have 30 minutes to prosecute this. This is a girls' club in a good way, officially. So we have 30 minutes. I will let the women do their thing, but please let us be a part of this. This is a very important conversation. So Dr. Dirisu, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is not the girls' club, but we are rehearsing. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We don't have much time, so we'll just get right into the conversation. I think the business case for advancing women's economic empowerment is clear. So we don't need, in terms of laying down the basics, just so that we can really hit the ground running. But we all understand that, once we are able to advance, empowerment of women, we're not doing it to create a girls' club. We're doing it to benefit the entire society. Family well-being improves, educational outcomes improve for children, improve nutrition, community prosperity. Even GDP will feel it when we advance women's economic empowerment. So I think we're on the same page. And I'll just turn straight to my wonderful panelists as we dissect this in the shortest possible time. So starting from you, Hansatu, you knew I was coming for you, yeah. So, there's a lot of conversations about advancing women's empowerment. And sometimes when you go and look for the evidence of what works, it becomes a challenge. Can you share from your rich experience examples of successful initiatives that have addressed issues relating to gender inequity and economic development?
Okay, so first of all, it is important for me to let us know that most of the time when we're talking about gender equity and women's economic empowerment, there is a cost to it. Globally, about 380 million women are living in extreme poverty. When we cascade it down to Nigeria, we know that at least about 145 people are multidimensionally poor, according to the National Bureau for Statistics. Now, what that automatically means, and most of us here have experienced it, is that where poverty, of course, is prevalent due to a number of factors, it is important for us to address it because most of the people that are affected are women and girls. And there are a few areas that I just want to quickly point out to. In Nigeria, for example, less than 1% of women-owned businesses benefit from procurement, public procurement and private procurement. So what that means is that procurement is a ₦1 trillion industry. yet only less than 1% of women-owned businesses benefit from that. And so one of the policies that the UN Women, for example, has been pushing for is affirmative procurement, whereby a certain percentage of women-owned businesses will benefit from procurement in Nigeria. And in order to ensure that we achieve that, we have been training entrepreneurs. Of course, we had to start with pilot states, Kaduna and Lagos, training entrepreneurs, and then ensuring that we are also advocating with government to pass across that, to implement that policy. And I'm happy to say in 2024, Kaduna State is the first Nigerian state to implement that policy about a month or two, about 2 months ago, the Kaduna State governor. So that is just one. The other ones will be things around gender-responsive budgeting, ensuring that the government, looking at their budgeting and fiscal policies, also factor in some of these target areas. And the last one I will mention is the care economy. Most of us know that a lot of women sacrifice their careers and their businesses to be stay-at-home moms, to be domestic caregivers, both for health reasons and childcare reasons. Now, what we don't even realize is that about $10.8 million is lost because these women are stay-at-home parents and so on and so forth. And so it's important for us to factor in the care economy by even having a national care policy. I'll stop at that. You can tell I'm very passionate.
Amazing. Yes, I felt your passion. But thank you for really highlighting that conversation about the procurement one. That's good. And we look forward to seeing other states take a cue from Kaduna State. So coming to you, Chisom, when we start having conversations about gender equity, we think about the fact that we can't afford to leave anyone behind. And I know that a lot of progress has been made, but there are still conversations that we need to have. So can you just speak to the sort of challenges that persons with disability face with getting access to skills training and getting access to opportunities, capital for advancing economic empowerment?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, according to World Health Organization, 15% of the world have one form of disability or the other. And if you bring that down to Nigeria, it tells us that about 35 million persons have one form of disability or the other. Disability is not a homogeneous kind of thing. It's not a one-cap-fits-all. For someone with a disability, the deaf person, this interpreter is useful. But for me, I also have a disability, but she is not useful to me. And so our challenges as a community, one, I would say, awareness gap. We have a Disability Act, and the moratorium period elapsed January this year. But how aware are people, whether the duty bearers or the rights holders, including the community of persons with disability, civil society organizations, how aware are they about this law? Most times, issues of disability comes as an afterthought. The Disability Act speaks to 5% quota for employment. And I ask, since the law, the act has been passed, how many employments have been intentional about reserving this 5% quota for persons with disability? Let's take, for instance, you don't even want to be employed, you want to go into business. If it is that difficult, the last panelist just spoke about 1%, and in my head, as an advocate, I began to press, if it is 1%, what is the fraction for women with disability? You know, because most times, people judge us based on our disabilities. Oh, hey, yeah, sorry. And I ask, what use are these things? You look at the intersection of gender and culture. It plays a huge role to the challenges women and girls with disabilities face. If you think women are facing challenges, when you get to the community of persons with disability, you will see that women and girls with disabilities face 3 times more. Because for everything, people do not want to. They just have this bias. How will she cope? How would you know how I would cope when you have not even approached me? You need to at least have an honest conversation with me. You need to be able to at least engage. Even if the person is not lettered, engage that person. That person is first a human being before his or her disability. And so we should start treating issues as such. We also need to see where exclusionary measures are being addressed. Because in most interventions, persons with disabilities are not brought to the decision-making tables. Our policies are not inclusive of persons with disability. Yes, we talk of diversity and everything, but most times, people just end up with male, female. Nobody thinks about women and girls with disabilities who also have an added disadvantage due to their disabilities. Most times, we are judged. People always tell us the things we can do and the things we cannot do based off of looking at us. Let me cite a typical example in 60 seconds. I have 3 degrees, and it took me 11 consecutive years to get my first official employment. I would do very well online, and by the time they invite me for a physical interview, at the time, post-polio syndrome had not set in, so I was using my walking sticks. So once I walk in, you just see their faces drop. We run through the interview and they say, we'll get back to you. But I knew they would never get back to me. Thank you.
You brought up a very critical issue here. And that's, you brought up a very critical issue here, and that's that stereotype. So first of all is acknowledging the fact that we need to, work with the Act to ensure that we are expanding access to opportunities for persons with disability, but we also have to address these critical issues around stereotype.
Yes,
thank you so much for sharing. I would come to Adora next. Given the kind of work, the impactful work you do, can you kind of help us reflect on how storytelling plays a role in advocating for gender equitable financial policies? Just speaking to that spectrum of women's economic empowerment and then the policy part of it. Where does what stories do we need to be telling? And how can storytelling enhance this journey?
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon. First of all, I want to say thank you to CJID for this conversation. It's very apt, especially that it's happening on a day that looks like 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and we're having this conversation. So this is the first inroad of looking at, excluding women from the conversation. So I say, please, a round of applause to that, and I say it's very apt. Thank you for that. And, interestingly, the theme is unite, invest, to prevent gender-based violence against women and girls. So when you hear investment, a lot of people first go to the currency of money, coins and banknotes. But I want us to look at the currency of voice. And that is what the important conversation for me is in answering your question. How do we look at the currency of voice as the first inroad towards investing to prevent gender-based violence, and remembering that women are disempowered when they also go through gender-based violence? She talked about the unpaid care, economy. I can tell you that when you look at the Nigerian labor laws, there is no section that talks about unpaid care. And unpaid care also talks about caregivers, such as people who care for persons and women with disability. So that's even the first conversation to have. And then another conversation to have is that understanding that the media is the fulcrum of a state in government, it means that we are held with the responsibility to amplify, to tell, to document, and to also build the roadmap towards policy literacy, implementation, and development. So these are all the significant roles that we must first look at before we even come to the issue of storytelling. Now, storytelling is broad because when we are talking about amplifying it, we're also looking at the possibilities that are open to us within the community, especially looking at the hybrid nature of the media. So you have traditional media, you have social media, you have radio, okay? And, you know, when you think radio, you're thinking platforms, you're thinking podcasts, you know? And then you're also thinking about community-centered conversations that are, you know, word to word, mouth to mouth, within market women. That's also a form of strategic communication because the news within local sections travel faster to households than when you even put, you know, information on radio. So how do you reach those kinds of people? And for me, I think that is why storytelling matters because it helps you to travel the journey. And what that means is that how are we telling the story? Who are we telling the story to, and how are women centered in that story? You know, when you hear conversations about women who have gone before us and ahead of us, you know, we hear about the Margaret Ebos, we hear about the Aba riots, now we hear about, you know, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, we hear about, you know, Professor Obi Ezekwesili, we hear about Hansatu here with us of the famous Wimbies. It's all about storytelling. And I can tell you that what has happened is that we have opened up a section and a space that now amplifies storytelling for even younger women voices who are now building and also sparking economic abilities and possibilities online. For instance, when the NSAS happened, it was the, you know, the feminist group that drove the economic narrative in pushing forward the thought process from online to offline. And that's an inroad, and that's storytelling. And then secondly, you also look at the 1,000 Women's March on Femicide in Kenya. It started by storytelling, a group of women coming together to say, enough is enough, enough of us have died in intimate partner relations. How do we move from just between this circle and move it to real time? And that's why and what you saw that went on the street. And of course, storytelling is also going to bring me back to the pressure that we put on the parliamentarians when we marched 2 weeks straight on, when the 5 gender bills were stepped down at the House of Rep. And I can tell you it is the conjugation of conversations that have happened on several platforms, the ability for organizations to come together, for people to tell their stories, for social media to begin hashtags to say, pass the 5 gender bills, you know, women's life matter, that started the arithmetic of looking at lobbying again, ensuring that voices went back to say, how do we get extra seats for women? And it is because of that conversation that we now have the House of Rep looking at 74 seats. I mean, it's past second reading. Yes. It's probably going to be passed, hopefully. But we say that if women didn't talk about it, yes, if the media didn't amplify it, if the stories were not told, yes, we will not even get the inroad that we have today.
Thank you so much. And that's powerful. Reminds me of a conversation I had 2 weeks ago, and bringing the storytelling even to the grassroots. And this woman said to me that, I want to see stories of women who have actually accessed this capital and done something with it to inspire me to go through this very hard journey of also doing that. So I think that at all levels, for the very successful, big, powerful women, but even just the everyday woman who is just making impacts, you know, doing those little things in her little corner. I think if we begin to bring all these stories together, like Adora said, the currency of voice to ensure that women are centered in the storytelling for economic development. I would like to warmly welcome Olajide Abiola. Thank you, CEO of KiaKia Cap Finance. Thank you so much for joining us. You're welcome. Yes, please come up. Thank you so much. So I'll go to you. Sorry. So sorry.
At least we're gender balanced.
Yes. Okay. So I'll go to you, Olajide. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I know you are just settling in. But, yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah. We're also trying to make sure that it's not just a women's club. So we have a guy to balance us out. So we've been talking a lot about women's economic empowerment. And we'd like you to just talk about how financial organizations like yours ensure that women are not marginalized, but are also given equal or equitable access to financial resources, despite the sort of barriers and constraints that we always put forward as the reasons why women are not getting capital.
Okay, thank you for having me. My microphone is okay. Thank you for having me, and good evening, everybody. And okay, while I was at the ends of affairs at KiaKia, because one of the things we actually pioneered was Lend Tech, creating a platform that granted, quick and access to credit, particularly to credible entrepreneurs. And one of the things we highlighted very early on in our operations was the fact that there was a high level of apathy, gender apathy, specifically by the female gender. So the female gender naturally believes that whenever these opportunities are made available, they are exclusive, more exclusive, and there is more preferential treatment for the men. So the apathy...
Can you tell us why?
Maybe cultural, considerations and what have you, and stereotypes over the years and over the centuries that it's mostly men that dominate, economic-related or oriented activities. So women should be less involved in activities that are mentally and also physically taxing. So women will not be able to go into it. So naturally, you have that apathy on both sides of the divide, from the men as well as from the women. So naturally, they disenfranchise themselves as a result of that apathy. You have many of the banks, many of the mainstream financial institutions even have specifically targeted products for women with lowered interest rates. But the fact is that how many women are actually subscribing to it? In order to further encourage access to credit, one of the things we undertook was an informal kind of research. And we observed that the women were actually more drawn to grants rather than to credits. So which means, they themselves have kind of placed a mental or cultural limitations as to what they feel or what they think they can do with these finances. So once that barrier has been broken, it's just like I usually encourage a whole lot of young people that apathy is one of the things as well that fuels corruption. Because once jobs are advertised or any opportunities are advertised, the natural instinctive response for many people is that they already know those they are going to pick. So they've predetermined it. So that way, so many people actually stay away. And for people who have the intent of actually gaming the system or being corrupt, that encourages it. So in cases where the women do not show up, do not participate, credit, just like politics as well, it's a participatory activity. You come up, you demonstrate your capabilities, your credibility, and your character. And once you are able to demonstrate that, and it's instructive, and I'm not even trying to, patronize the female gender here. When we looked at the ratio of performance of those we gave credit to, we realized that the female or the women were actually more responsible with credit. So, and I believe that is an established fact. We cannot understand the reason for that, maybe because the men actually have more demand of urgent 2K on them. So that might have explained that. So yeah. I'll just end here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being vulnerable enough to highlight this important point. I think that as part of programming for financial organizations, it will now be taking the responsibility to also address the barriers that limit women from coming forward for capital. I think it's the same conversation with supplier diversity and procurement. It's still that same conversation about, women are not represented here. The conversation is, how do we ensure that in the spirit of equity, persons with disability, women, vulnerable groups are represented? And I always say that it is our responsibility as society to now create those opportunities, even if it's agency training, awareness. It's our responsibility to now create those opportunities. And I think this is a really good place to turn over to Chisom. You lead the Skills Woman Initiative. So speaking to what you have done, and I'm hoping that you may be able to answer some of the questions that he's just raised, but you know, can you share some success stories that exemplify what it means to really drive impactful financial inclusion for women? And also acknowledging some of the challenges that he mentioned and how you've addressed it in your work.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening. Thank you, CJID, for this opportunity. So the Skilled Women Initiative is an organization that actually caters to the needs of the lower community. So we basically serve internally displaced persons, refugees, and women in low-income communities. So I was listening to him, and he was talking about women being more drawn towards grants. Well, maybe because they're trying to play safe, I don't know. But also, I think it's because it's easier for them to access without all the necessary go and exhume your grandmother from the grave and bring it to the bank. So it's easier for women to access grants. For women to be able to get loans in the bank, you have to bring maybe a collateral. And we understand the cultural barriers that women have in terms of even owning land. It's just getting a bit easier. But there are a lot of barriers to being able to get loans for businesses, as a woman in business. But I'm going to speak in terms of the work that we've done and the role of financial inclusion for women. So basically what we do is we provide vocational skills. I don't know if anybody has been to the camps. Has anybody in this room been to an IDP camp? Yeah. Okay, so I have just like 3 people. So within Abuja alone, we have about 18 settlements. We have 5 official internally displaced camps and about 18 settlement. In one camp alone, we have 5,000. In Wasa, we have 5,000 women and children that are displaced. Now, displacement has actually taken over 10 years. So, and when we talk about displacement, the first thing that comes to your head is maybe the insurgency. But women are displaced as a result of gender-based violence. We have flooding. Women are displaced. Recently, in the community in Ruga, there was the demolition. And if you go there, you see that there's no housing. These people sleep under the roof, basically. So our work is to go there and find out how can we enable these people to get back their lives, right? And this is part of empowering women. We're not just talking about the women in the settings where we see, we're talking about women in those communities. So having worked in this space for over 5 years, what I can say is that the access to skills, even for women that are in normal communities, I'll use the word normal, access to skills training centers are very difficult. You can't come out and say, oh, this is a skills training center. I actually know maybe about 2. One for us at the camp and one in Area 3 in Abuja, right? So access to skills is a very major issue. Secondly, the second one I'll talk about is spousal support. So recently, we just trained about 100 people in different skills. A woman came up to me and said, okay, so I'm going through this space where I have like issues with my husband. Every day she was coming with her 2 girls, twin girls, very little girls. And she would come and she would train. And I said, why is there no one supporting you? And she told her story. Right, it was gender-based violence. Yeah. And she was displaced as a result of that. But her husband is still, of course, around. And those kind of things hinder women from getting, the access that they need to for the skills. Yesterday, someone sent me a Twitter message where they said China and America are growing their communities with technical skills. Those are the skills that we need to actually bring on board in terms of hairdressing. I'm just going to talk about basic skills for women in those communities. Hairdressing, barbering, carpentry, all those kind of skills that can actually enable a woman go into the streets and get her own job. Another thing you're going to talk about is you train the women. Do you give them access to equipment? Right, you can just, what we see most times is, oh, we're training women for 3 days. After that, what next? They don't have equipment to start up their training and all of those kind of things. So there are a lot of issues. But what we have done is to be able to bring the skill center to the women because we understand that, okay, there are these issues. We brought the skill center, we've brought access to market. Because of those women, we say, okay, when you make the products, we'll help you sell it. We get the customers to them. So these are some of the issues that have worked for us. And I'll probably say within the timeline that we've had, I can talk about Aisha. So Aisha is, she was a displaced woman she has been in camp for over maybe 8 years. And then in 2022, we trained her. Now, Aisha moved, and you always have to have, and what we've seen is that you always need your husband's support within those settings. She talked to her husband, she learned the training, we taught her upcycling. Now, Aisha moved out of the camp in 2023. She's now in Nasarawa. She went to, as of yesterday, she sent me a picture. She just graduated from nursing school. So those are the kind of stories that we see.
That's a good place to clap. Yeah.
So the ability to train those women. And the thing is, if you go to Durumi camp, we have a center that we train women. They go there and they work. Yeah. And Aisha and Zara actually were IDPs that we train. Now they are the ones training the women. They sell the product. They teach the women. So those are the kind of opportunities that we need to create. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm tempted to just add something to what she said. I mean, some years ago, I was working in the Northeast around camps on a project, and this very large camp, thousands of people. There was this very big skills acquisition center opposite the camp, and it was completely empty. And so I was asking them in the center, and they said, "Oh, the women are not coming. They're not coming, and this camp is for them." And then we get into the camp because we were doing interviews at that time. And then the women said, "Nobody asked us what we wanted to learn. Well, local farmers were displaced by the Boko Haram conflict. And then we come here, the only thing to learn, they just flooded the place with sewing machines. Who are we going to make clothes for in the camp?" So always, sometimes we make decisions for the women, like we know this is what they want to do, we know, and then we're not really carrying them along. Thank you so much for sharing. Great to hear about Aisha. In 1 second, I don't know if anybody has any comments, trying to be respectful of time so that we get that feedback to our panelists to say one last word. In the absence of that, I will start asking my panelists to say one last word, and then if anyone has something to say. So quickly, just 15 seconds.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm Kingsley Onwuka. So my question I'm throwing to the panelists is, for example, we're talking about women empowerment, and we know what state governors' wives they are doing in the various states. But this women empowerment have to do with I know somebody. So as NGOs, as what would I call it, women advocates, how do you people narrow the gap in encouraging this first lady that women empowerment have to deal with the right people? Because some of these, you will see first lady, they will gather women, but at the end of the day, the people that benefited are party members.
Okay, thank you.
So how do we narrow that gap?
All right, thank you so much. So while the questions are coming, I'll start from Olajide. Just give one last powerful word, and you can address his question as part of that. 35 seconds, please.
Okay, I've always emphasized this. There are a lot of opportunities in Nigeria, even in the midst of the atmosphere that is surcharged with negativity. One of the things you need to arm yourself properly with is knowledge and proper orientation. Like, let me quickly answer your question. Years ago, we actually assessed a particular facility from one of the banks, and it was the largest in the entire northern region. And everybody was asking, who did you know? Who did you know? We didn't know anybody. It was just purely based on merit. And recently, we got a BG with another bank, purely based on merit. So oftentimes, ignorance and apathy can be self-sabotaging. So you overconsume negative information rather than adopting a research and study-driven model of decision-making. So find out, research. Don't listen to the other person. The fact that the other person did not succeed does not make that your own reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olajide. Thank you so much. Adora.
All right, thank you so much. What I'll first of all, maybe to answer your question is, first of all, I know this is an emerging conversation, but the First Lady's office is not constitutional. The person's office who is constitutional is the governor. Now, you need to hold the governor accountable why there are no welfare systems in place for women to benefit from that. It now depends on only empowerment for only a section of the people, which you mentioned, the party members. And that brings me back to amplifying. Now, when you begin to amplify the issues and the gaps within state government, for instance, you're from what state? Abia State. That brings you as a gatekeeper and as a watchdog within that space, and I'm sure you're in the media space, what now happens is that you begin to question the budget. How gender responsive is the budget of Abia State? How many MDAs are able to access that budget? How do you follow implementation in the communities where those budget lines are really tailored for? These are the questions that perhaps that need answers. Because at the end of the day, the First Lady's office will tell you that it's somebody that a benefactor that gave it to her or somebody that sent it to her, and she may not be able to give you account. But in holding the objective of governance accountable, that now brings amplification to the issues and why women are not getting what they're getting. And finally, I would say this. In terms of amplifying women's financial inclusion, I think we also need to look at collaborative networking, collaborative media. And I can say this has worked for us as an organization in Gender Strategy Advancement International. And the work that we have done with Wole Soyinka Investigative Journalism Center has pivoted a lot of voices that ab initio have not been mapped. In the sequence of our engagement, we found out that women in the communities amongst the 6 area councils in Abuja were desirous of 3 major things. 1, accessible water that is clean. 2, public maternal health care. 3, also education, because they felt that qualitative educational infrastructure was not available. So we were now able to design and form what we call women community vanguards, where they are now the ones advocating for changes within those communities. And finally, I would say women with disability need to be given the advantage to tell their stories from a place of respect and not from charity. And I think that's why we need to engage them, to collaborate them, and that will be my final sequence.
Thank you. Telling the story from the place of respect and not from charity. Thank you. Chisom.
Okay, so I'll say for the men in the room, basically, I'll say support your wives, support your sisters, support your girl child. So let me give you a reason. I grew up watching my mom do like a lot of things. She had a lot of businesses, and I saw my dad support her. Now let me tell you a factor. She here is my elder sister, right? Same mom, same dad.
Oh,
now,
wow.
I did not know she was on this panel until I got the list. And I look at her and I'm like, maybe what we have is because we saw a woman that put it together with the support of our dad, right? So what I'm going to say is support the women in your life. And especially even if education really doesn't have to go, or the school education is important, but also try to teach a skill. Try to teach a woman a skill. I have a master's, but I make hats. And that was how I started my organization. That skill alone, when I started making hats, I was making hats for 3,000. Now, to make a hat for someone, I'll charge you 150,000 because I have grown in that space. So no matter the work I do, I still make those things. So teaching a woman a skill is like empowering her to go beyond and over. Thank you very much.
So we need to set up both the men's and the women's club all together.
For me, I want to say that when it comes to women's economic empowerment, 3 things that are absent that makes you not economically empowered. Number 1 is power. Getting women on decision-making tables or places of leadership. Number 2 is lack of access to resources. And I want to also mention that in the current economic climate that we are in, the pressure is too much on the men. So if you don't empower your women, you are the one that will be having high blood pressure because everybody is calling you left and right for one thing or the other. If there is a balance and money is coming in, it reduces the pressure on you. Number 3, you also need to look at the fact that the policies, the system itself and the policies also affect us. And I want to encourage the media. Let us tell the stories. Let us amplify the issues that are relevant, and let us celebrate the successes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To balance the account, we need men and women to be contributing to the purse. So let's make it happen for women. And you have the floor.
Thank you so much. So it's easy to say nothing about us without us, leave no one behind. But more importantly, our policies must be inclusive. We must amplify the stories of women and girls with disabilities who are resilient, surviving against all odds, and also tell the stories of exclusionary practices that have also heightened the challenges that we go through. Together, we'll make it work. Thank you.
Thank you. So over to you, media. Please amplify the stories of women, of persons with disability, of women with disability, and let's make the magic for women economic empowerment. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to the amazing panel.
That was quite an interesting panel session, wouldn't you agree? Another round of applause for our amazing, amazing panelists.